Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. In addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I'm a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you'll find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Amy Daughters. I know what you're thinking. It's a fake name. She's a fiction writer, so it likely is a fake name. It sounds just too cute by half. It's either a pseudonym, a fictional name, or she married a guy named Ronaldo Daughters. We're going to find that out, though. We're going to answer all questions before we let her go. But in addition to having a suspicious surname, she's the author of the books Dear Dana and... this is a separate title. You Cannot Mess This Up. That's the title. So you get the idea here. We're not going to mess anything up here right now. In addition to being an author, though, she's a keynote speaker and a spreader of hope. You know, the Keep Hope Alive thing. But what really is this woman's story? It all started when Dick and Sue Wineland hooked up in an apartment complex in Houston. That's Houston, Texas. 4 years later, after things got cozy and carnal, Amy Wieland was born. Amy Wieland, today Amy Daughters, just a few short miles from the 8th wonder of the world, which many of you know as the Houston Astrodome. I think it was the first dome stadium in the country. I'm pretty sure it was first dome stadium in the country, maybe in the world. So she ends up blossoming into womanhood north of Houston in a little town called Spring, Texas. From there, was on to the Princeton of the Texas Panhandle, the Texas Tech University. So all you Buckeyes can eat your heart out. And just 5 glorious years later, she emerged with a Bachelor of Business Administration degree. That's when it became time for Amy to not only enter the world of business, but to do her own hooking up and procreating. The plot twist that brings us to the rest of the story was that her husband's job swept him over to England, Mother England, for 3 years. So finding herself temporarily without employment, what do all unemployed people do? They do the most obvious thing, become a writer. So you can continue to be unemployed, but masquerade as a worker. Amy Daughters, or whoever you really are, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Mike. Maybe perhaps the best introduction I've ever received, even though that was a lot of my content. Ronaldo and I appreciate you hitting on all those key points and adding your own verbiage, which I pretty much enjoyed completely.
I had to rewrite a little bit, I mean, I'm an editor and a writer, so I just don't feel like I'm doing my job unless I'm rewriting other people's copy. And I'll aggravate you before this thing is over, probably. So Ronaldo, what are the chances that I got your husband's first name right? What is Mr. Daughter's real first name?
His real first name is William, but he goes by Willie. But tonight,
Willie.
He's Ronaldo. Yeah, he's Ronaldo.
Ronaldo, yeah. Willie Daughters.
Right, which is such a common name in this area,
So I'm sure Texas is full of Ronaldos. And you're now in Houston. You're outside. You're in suburban Houston now. What's the name? Is it Tomboy or
Tomball? Tomball. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Tomboy would have been better. A woman living in Tomboy, Texas would have been better. But
right.
I have to ask you, how tall are you?
I'm about 5'7.5", 5'8". So.
Okay, because I spent some time in Texas and in the Panhandle, and everybody's taller in Texas. It seems. I think it's all the Swift, packing plant meat that you guys eat. You know, Swift packing plant, the meat processing plant.
Yeah, there's a great big one outside of Amarillo in the Texas Panhandle. It's
Amarillo, that's where I was. Well, actually, Canyon, Texas, a little dry town when I went to West Texas State University for just my freshman year. But the Panhandle. Well, it's got to be the Saudi Arabia of wind power, because the wind blows one direction 24/7, 365. And having had that experience and seeing cactuses growing sideways,
right.
I'm thinking when wind power became the thing in this country, I'm just thinking that they could probably power the whole country if they just fill the Panhandle with wind turbines.
And
My understanding is there's lots of them there, and they're producing a lot of power.
right, everywhere you look now, there are wind turbines in that area. And the plot twist, Mike, is that Ronaldo Willie Daughters attended and graduated from West Texas State A&M
Oh my
University,
God! Oh,
and he
now
grew up
A&M,
in
yeah, they
Canyon.
changed it.
He
Yeah.
grew
Oh,
up
he
in
grew up in
Canyon.
Canyon.
Well, his
It-
dad was a high school football coach, so he moved around the Panhandle. But what are the chances that Ronaldo and you went to the same
oh my
school?
God! Isn't that something? And so he had to drive up what's the freeway between Amarillo and Canyon? Which freeway is that?
I-20.
So
No,
I-20.
no, is it I-20 or 27, I believe. 27.
I-27, whatever it is, there's the highway that you take up the road to a
Hmm.
little side of the highway shack where you can drive. It's drive up liquor sales. You
It's
can go in or you drive up to the drive up window.
right,
And we bought our beer there, and then we took it back to the campus because you could drink there, but you
right.
couldn't buy it there because it was too religious a town. They didn't want any of the devil's juice
Oh, yeah,
sold
yeah.
there. You could bring it in, but you couldn't buy
And
it there.
and
So, wow,
and that establishment was called the Buffalo Chip. I've been
the
there myself.
buffalo chip. You have been. Okay, you know it.
Yes,
Yes.
that's
Oh,
hilarious.
and
That's
not only
very
that, but
small.
I used to always see the sign Lubbock 105. Now, Lubbock is where the Texas Tech Red Raiders are. I'm saying this for the benefit of our audience, because you obviously know this, but it always said Lubbock 105, 105 miles away. And I always wondered, what is Lubbock like? I never even got there, but then I later learned that Texas Tech was there. And what were he had to have seen that. So Ronaldo had to have seen that sign. Little did he know his future procreator, um,
Yes,
a partner in procreation would be going to school there. So,
right.
wow,
Just
all these
yeah.
synchronicities. All
Who
these
knew?
synchronicities.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. So when you're invited to be a keynote speaker, what do you speak about? What's your message?
Well, I speak about, and that's where my whole spreader of the hope comes in. I speak about letter writing, and I speak about how the forgotten practice of letter writing has the power in any kind of relationship where there's two humans involved to absolutely in 2024 to be off the chain and making a difference, whether you're doing professionally, personally, just a handwritten the just sending someone else a handwritten note with just a few thoughts in it, just the power that can have.
Yes. It's
It
like
can,
hitting him with a javelin. It's like nobody does this anymore. Nobody takes the time. Everybody's too lazy. And you can't just have a template letter to do that. You have to, even if you have a template letter, you have to rewrite it over and over. Nobody's going to
right.
do that. So there's authenticity to it.
Right. And I had no idea. I mean, I wrote letters when I was younger, but when I got back into letter writing, when I was minding my own business, I had no idea that in, 2020, that if I sent you a letter, you'd go to your mailbox and immediately be like, click, 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 like, here's everything she had to do to make this happen. She had to sit down. She had to get a pen. Her hand had to hurt. Wait, where's my address? Then she has to have a stamp. Then she has to drive somewhere and mail it. And immediately you're going to think, oh my God, I matter this much to another person, to the point where it's overwhelming how much letters can, and in my experience, hundreds of letters later, can mean to someone. Where now I'm a letter writing advocate, where before I was someone who hadn't written the letter in decades.
So you actually had not written a letter for a long time before you went on the campaign.
Right. And I went
And
on the
that
camp.
campaign was that you wrote to every Facebook friend, I believe. You had more
Mhm.
than 500 Facebook friends or connections, however you want to call them, and you wrote to every one of them. What was that? And presumably, some of these people were more acquaintances than friends, and you didn't really know all that much about them, but you wrote to them. So, what was that whole experience like? Now, this ties into your first book too, right? Dear Dana, is
Right.
that right?
It
Okay, we'll get
does.
to that in a minute, but so this is why I want to spend a little time on it because this leads to your first book. So,
Or
what was it like writing to all those people?
well, it was life changing, and I mean that's a cliche thing to say, but it absolutely, transformed the way I looked at everything. Because you're exactly right. I mean, a Facebook friend list is so relatable because there's the people you did life with at work, maybe a job for 10 years. There's your old neighbor. There's a kid you grew up with, but then there's a friend of a friend maybe you met, and then there's the girl you had too much to drink with and danced at that wedding, and y'all were like BFFs in the women's room. So you wrote all those people letters, but the process was exactly the same, Mike. Because if you're going to write somebody a letter, you're going to have to, especially someone you don't know that well or haven't seen in long, or maybe you even know them well. You go, so just by sheer, just to fulfill the duty of writing the letter, I would sit before I'd write each letter and look at their profile. And then all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, first of all, I'd miscategorized a lot of people. I was like, oh, I went to high school with them. Well, no, you didn't. You went to summer camp with them. But beyond that, you realize, first of all, these people are living amazing lives. And I know that the Facebook profile cannot show you the true authenticity of a human experience. But by sitting and looking at each person individually, even if I didn't know them that well, I was like, oh my gosh, this person's like like you're an author, you're a podcaster, you're a storyteller, and let's say we went to high school together. Well, I probably wouldn't have fully appreciated that till I dug deeper, because I probably would have looked at your website. I would have listened to something you've done, and you're like, oh my gosh, these people are rock stars. I'm related to all these people, and they're having these real life experiences. I thought, I just knew what your political views were, but then I find out that, and I'm making this up, that you've had a loss, you've lost something, or you struggled with an illness, or your life isn't as perfect as it seems. And so that would be the first thing I could write about is, oh my gosh, I'm connected. I'm amazed at all the things you've done. I'm sorry about this. Congratulations for that. So that's a
So
one way.
you looked into their background a little bit, what they're doing now. You
Right.
learned a little about their background. Then you, of course, tailored the letter to that. Now, what about a person though who was a friend of a friend, and all of a sudden, wham! Here's a letter from Amy, who, yeah, I'm connected on Facebook, but why is she writing to me? What approach did you take to somebody who you only had a tenuous connection to?
Right. Well, I mean, well, each of the letters at the beginning said, this is why I'm doing it. And then that's the first part of the
Why?
story, which
Why was it?
I was writing the letters because, and that goes to the backstory of why I started writing the letters. And what happened was I reconnected with a friend on Facebook
Oh, yeah.
that I hadn't
Okay.
talked. Yeah, that's the whole backstory.
This starts getting you into the Dear Dana
Right,
story. Now, you actually ended up on the Kelly Clarkson show about this. She heard about what you did in the
right,
book and invited you on, and you told short format. You were only on there for about 6 minutes. That's the way these things go.
right.
We'll give you more. We've already given you more time than that. So chalk went up for us. Talk about, let's jump back to how the initiation of this campaign having to do with Dana. Tell that story.
Right. Well,
And
again,
this is the book. Is the story you're about to tell it's the book. You're telling the story of the book, but there's obviously more in the book to it. I'm
right.
assuming.
The book takes the first part with Dana, and then the Facebook letter writing campaign or project or whatever, however you want to frame it. It takes those two stories and kind of weaves them together into, this is, the entirety of my letter writing experience. Um, but so back to Dana. I met Dana at a summer camp in Texas probably 35 years ago. We spent maybe 6 weeks together, huge personalities. Both of us thought we were funny. We connected immediately. And then we did 35 years of life totally apart. We weren't connected on Facebook. We didn't keep up with each other. There was no staying in touch. I had no idea what happened to her. But I'd always remembered her. Again, big personalities. I guess she had just stuck in my head. And I looked her up on Facebook one day. It was probably 2014. I found her. I found that she had 5 kids. She had overachieved in children, um, 4 girls. And then the youngest child was a son. His name was Parker. He had cancer, and it was serious enough that he was at St. Jude in Memphis. So immediately the story kind of over resonated with me. As a mom, as a human being, I was like, oh, this is terrible. I sat down at my desk several weeks later to write something, and I was like, it was like a lightning bolt. I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start writing them letters and sending them to the Ronald McDonald House. And this letter was several levels of me behaving irrationally and crazily. And the first one was, I'm going to reach out to this woman whose son is battling for his life. And she probably doesn't even remember who I am, even though she accepted my Facebook friend request. So I start writing Dana and Parker letters and sending them to Memphis, Tennessee. And probably 10 or 12 weeks into that, Parker passes away at 15. He doesn't,
Oh,
and that's just completely devastating. And it has nothing to do with me. And I know that, but I'm like, what am I supposed to do? And so I, again, next level crazy, just kept writing her. Only this time, like, where was her address? Where did she even live? I found that she lived in Louisiana. I had met her husband the same summer. I knew he was an attorney. So again, and I know this was crazy, I just sent the letters to his law office thinking, oh, no big deal. But the whole time I knew, I was like, this is crazy. You're being like, they've got to be thinking, you are irrational, you're nuts. But I just kept doing it because I couldn't stop myself. And it was just inspired. And so I continue to write her. She starts about 6 months into it, she starts writing me back. Total strangers communicating through the mail. And Mike, we spent 2 years as pen pals in 2017, 2019. We didn't exchange texts, phone numbers, and it created a space between the two of us where we could say whatever we wanted to. And this sounds so simple, but since we were mailing the letters, we didn't know when the other one was reading the letters. And so it was this vacuum between us. And we told each other almost everything. We would say stuff like, well, I've never told anybody this, but I trust you. I mean, literal stranger across the country. I trust you, stranger, with my information. But she talked about her grief. I looked at my life from the outside in. There was the whole angle of it being so powerful to write about your own life. I began to gain this whole new perspective on everything around me. We both overshared, but the most beautiful thing was I had no idea whether she was Republican or Democrat. I had no idea what her specific religious beliefs were. I didn't know about her socioeconomic level, and I didn't care about any of that. All I knew was this was a girl who I used to know who had lost her son, who I cared about deeply, who I had this intimate in-writing relationship with. And so after about, I don't know, 9 or 10 months of writing Dana, I sat back and I was like, you know what? If all this can happen from this one girl who I really don't know, from Louisiana, apparently, then what else is out there on this list of people? So then I went all world nuts, like bananagrams, and put up his name in a box, got some stationery, and I was like, let's go. Let's write all these people. And I didn't think I was going to finish. I mean, it was 580 at the end. I kept a journal through the whole thing. I really didn't, I didn't have any intention, but once I got past several hundred letters, I realized this was going to change the trajectory of my life. That was probably the most important thing I was ever going to do. And I was going to write it out till the end. And so I did. And now
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's a great story that just happened to me.
So the Dana exchanges were over the course of a couple of years, it sounds like. And then
Right.
when you decided, hey, there's gems all over my, Facebook connection list, and you started writing to your 500 plus connections, what period of time did it take you to write to all of them?
It took me 18 months to write everybody.
And how many actually wrote back? What percentage, I mean, or number, either
Yeah,
way?
I'm a numbers girl, so it was like 76%, and that included there was a lot of handwritten responses because people felt compelled to reply in kind, which makes sense. But then I counted, texts, phone calls, emails, Facebook messages, in-person replies. I counted all that because a reply is a reply at the end of the day. But I did learn. I had a hard time keeping up with the replies, so I was not in it after probably 50 letters for the reply because it just was untenable. I couldn't keep up with it.
Well, when you wrote these letters, how did you open it? Did you tell them what you were doing, or did you give a rationale for reaching out to them in that way?
Right.
Did you not that, of course, none of us want to be formulaic, but did you have kind of an opening statement that you were using broadly?
Right. And the letters kind of did take on a formula because if you write that many of anything, you're gonna develop a systematic way of doing it. I mean, they were all personal
Yes.
for sure. But so the first paragraph was like, I'm not crazy, but I had this experience with my friend Dana. This is like in one sentence. And now I decided it was so transformative to me that I decided I would try to test and what you said earlier in this conversation, you said connections as opposed to friends, and you use those words to talk about Facebook. And so I said I'm kind of testing what friendship means on social media by doing this, and I said, I know this is crazy, but this is what I'm doing. And then I would launch into the body of the letter after telling that intro.
Yeah, so they got the point. They got the point. You positioned it, and then it became personal after that. So the book itself, Dear Dana, contains what?
Well, the first part tells that story in, like 4 or 5 really short chapters of how I met Dana, how we reconnected, about Parker, and it includes some of her words mostly because some of our letters back and forth, and then it transitions into my idea to write everyone. And then the second half of the book is 52 very short chapters with actual letters back and forth, or snippets of the letters, kind of an anthology of letters. And each letter represents a takeaway, like a major lesson I learned in the project. So
Wow.
it's a short read. It's inspiration. I mean, it's inspirational just because the story is inspirational, but it's so full of hope. And I did not go into that project one bit expecting to write a book. I mean, I was a writer, I am a writer, but again, I got to the tipping point and I realized that God or fate or whatever you want, however you want to frame it, had given me this incredible story to tell. And so I absolutely felt compelled and obligated to tell the story.
Now, you said you are and have been a writer. I mean, so your writing career, did it start with the letters, or were you a writer prior to that?
Prior to that, and like you had said, and you're beautiful and better than I wish. I'll have to write down what you said and redo my bio on my website. But I went to the UK with my husband about 15 years into my career in purchasing, and without a work visa and a kid at a village school. The first thing I did is I went to the University of Birmingham in England and took history classes. When I realized that wasn't going to completely fit the bill, I'd always creatively written, and so I just began to write and take it seriously almost out of desperation. That's how my writing career started.
What got you writing to begin with? It predates going to England. But that's where when you started really bearing down on it. When did you begin writing, or just decide I am a writer, I want to write?
I wrote as early as elementary school. I mean, my mom still has the little book. I wrote on George Washington because I like history, and all those. I think that's always been within me, but it took that life change for it to come out. I mean, I wrote short stories, and I was always the girl at work who would write well, I think a lot of people have this in common who like to write. I write my emails and reread them and think, oh my God, that email on Chardonnay was probably the best thing anyone's ever read at this company, and try to write humorously about the company picnic. So I think it was always in there. It just
Hmm.
needed, it needed an avenue to come out. And those 3 years in England, because otherwise I would have been focused on my career, gave me a chance to take myself really seriously and then gain some traction. So by the time I got back, then I had created kind of a niche for myself. I had another kid, so I had a maternity leave. And then by the end of that, I had created, I'd replaced, a good portion of my pre-UK salary. And then I just took it from there.
Now, does Ronaldo Willie Daughters do that took him to England?
Well, he works for a computer software company that they do software and hardware for automobile dealerships. So his company bought a company in the UK and Europe, and that gave us the opportunity, which was a gift to go over there, not just on the writing level, but what a great opportunity in your 30s to go to another country for 3 years.
Oh yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, England's a great country, so you must have spent time in the pubs. You learned all the phrasing.
Oh
You learned
yeah,
not to say, "Hey, you look spunky today." No,
yeah.
don't say that to somebody in Britain.
Right, right. Yeah, there's a lot of things you do want to say and don't want to say. We learned a lot. And then just the idea, and then we traveled a lot because he had offices in Europe and it's super inexpensive, and plus, it was just flights because they were paying for the hotels and the cars. But and then just I think the opportunity to live somewhere outside of the United States, for more than just a couple week vacation, you become a better global citizen because the United States is inwardly facing because we're so big and it's easy to get caught up in that. But there's this whole other world going on that I feel like I'm pretty well read, maybe not the smartest girl in the world, but it just did so much for the depth
You don't
of
want to be the
how I look.
smartest. You just want to be the funniest.
Right. And
Were you
yeah,
always comedic? Were you always
yes.
a
Oh, yes.
person
From
who
from
yeah?
the very beginning. Right.
And what
Yeah.
do you think that instinct is? I mean, do you think people take life too seriously, or that it's the absurdity of life, so why not laugh at it? Or is there any? Maybe there's not an answer to that question. Sometimes it's all chemistry, but
Right.
the software code that the Matrix delivers into our system, or is there something that is there actually an answer to that question? Why you lean that direction?
Well, I think part of it's genetics. I had a very humorous grandfather who I adored, and that part of it was probably I got some of those genes. Part of it was example. I watched him work a room, and I probably was highly impressed. And I think the other part of it is, humor's always given me it's almost like a survival technique. And I haven't had some dramatic life, but I'm just saying in situations, we all have a gift that can get us through a conversation. And I think mine has always been humor. I think it's natural. I think I have good comedic timing, but I also think it's situationally, it's worked really well for me. I'm the funny girl, and I can divert the tone of things, and I enjoy doing it.
So give us a synopsis of your other book, You Cannot Mess This Up.
Right. That book is completely different. It's fictional, and I like to say it's a memoir wrapped up in a tortilla of, of fiction, which is time travel. So it gave me, it's a memoir. I wrote a memoir because I wrote myself back in time to my childhood in 1978. I'm basically a I write myself as myself, a writer living. We lived in Ohio at the time.
It's
I
written in first person.
Yes. And so I write myself back. I'm going back home to discuss my parents' estate. My parents are still living, but they want to, have everybody on the same page. So I fly on this small plane back because I couldn't get on the plane I was supposed to. And then somewhere on the flight back, I go back to 1978. And this time travel guide, who's the pilot, who's my husband's boss's wife, she puts me in like this huge Ford LTD, at this airport I'm not supposed to be at. And she drives me to my parents' home in 1978. And she says, okay, your parents are expecting you. They think you're a distant cousin from Ohio. You have to go in there and spend 36 hours with these people. And so the people included my mom and dad, who were the same age as me in the story, my my older sister, my younger brother, and then my 10-year-old self who should have been on ADHD medication. So, and so I get dropped into this situation, and it's so relatable, not because I wrote it, and it's because great, but I've talked to so many people who've read it, and the immediate thing you do is you picture yourself in the same scenario, no matter what year you grew up or what year you picture yourself being dropped off at your childhood home and having to survive 36 hours within the walls as an outsider.
So you're talking to your 10-year-old self, and does she know that you're her future person?
No, I think, the way I wrote it is she gets a sense because there's this connection between the older Amy and the younger Amy. But she never knows definitively because, part of the limits of the story is I realize I can't tell anybody because that's craziness. Who would present themselves as a time traveler. So I
And this
wrote
gives you an opportunity to redefine difficult relationships with your family members. I'm pilfering this off of the description on Amazon. Um, so, um, what is the final analysis? In other words, what's the takeaway on with the book?
I think that the takeaway is, memories are very malleable. I could have remembered because I wrote the book based on my memories. So I can remember something as a 10-year-old person, a 10-year-old kid. But when my 45-year-old self goes and sees it again, I'm going to remember it in a whole different way. So it's not that the 10-year-old version of myself's memories were incorrect, um, but I would see them differently now if I saw them again. So it calls into question and smooths out some of the memories I had that maybe were more difficult and the
Are
way
you
I saw.
seeing them with greater empathy or
Right,
with
well, with much greater empathy. I looked at my mother, who I had a difficult relationship with, and then I went back in time and I wrote myself back in time and I saw her as a contemporary. And I was like, this girl is just trying to get through 1978 at Thanksgiving with no help and no internet. And my mom always wanted to write. She had a typewriter and she loved Hollywood and nostalgia. And, she was not encouraged to do any of those things. And I had this vast opportunity that she was not none of that was there for her. And she kept this impeccable house and no one ever said thank you. And I just looked at her and I was like, this woman is a superhero. She's basically Wonder Woman of 1978. And I didn't see it. And I didn't see how not out of control. I mean, I was a good kid, but I was bouncing all over the place. And I was very unique and I thought I was funny and I had a bad bowl cut. And she was just trying to keep me in the box so my grandmother wouldn't think I was a freak. And I didn't see that before. I didn't give her that I didn't give her that leeway. And the thing about myself, my little self, I'd always, like a bunch of us, so many of us, I struggled with the younger version of myself. I was like, oh my God, I can't see her. And I went into writing that book thinking, oh my God, I need to get away from her. And then at the end of the book, I was like, oh my God, I lived all the best parts of us away. And I wanted to be her. And so I wrote that book thinking, I'm going to write the funniest back in time book. I'm going to get all the Sears catalogs out. I'm going to YouTube the crap out of this thing. I'm going to the library. This is going to be a research heavy book. And it was. And it's going to be so funny. And I believe it is. But I ended up writing this catharsis because I went into that book one person and came out a totally different person. I realized that my suburban, non-extraordinary, normal, mundane life mattered to me. And it was so freeing and not even satisfying. It was just profoundly moving that it didn't matter what it meant to everyone else. It meant that it mattered to me.
Right, right. That's such a great point you make about, your mom keeping an immaculate home or at least a really put together home, and nobody ever tells her thank you. My wife is that way. She keeps just a great home, and she changes it seasonally. For instance, it's the fall when you walk into our home, or it's Christmas when you walk in, or it's spring,
Right.
and I've even had friends who are couples who are friends come over, and I think there's times when it's where the woman who's visiting doesn't keep a great home and doesn't exactly appreciate her husband saying such nice things about, wow, you keep the place so nice and blah, blah. It's almost like, because not all women do that. I mean,
No, they don't. They don't.
and guys count on women to do it because most men aren't any good at it.
Right.
But that's a really great point. Just the act of keeping a place together and clean and organized,
Right.
making it work. That's a big deal.
Right. And she was doing it without a lot of I mean, 1978 wasn't 1942, but she did not have the things that we have now. I mean, she didn't have all and I saw that as, another, a woman doing it 25 years after her, 28 years after her. I could see all those things and it changed my mom and I's relationship. That's one of the best outcomes of the book.
Now, you grew up next to one of the eighth wonder of the world, the Astrodome. Did you
Right.
did you ever go to the Astrodome? Have you ever been in the Astrodome for an event?
Oh, yes. I grew up, I'm a sports lover. That's mainly what I've written about. Through most of my career, I wrote about
Oh, the Houston Oilers, and you
I,
had a crush on Dan Pastorini.
my dad hated Dan Pastorini. That's the
I didn't
best.
like him either. He always threw the ball straight up in the air in key situations so the other team could intercept it. Just didn't understand that guy.
Yeah. My dad didn't either. And so he had, through his employer, we got to go to the Astros games every once in a while. So that was kind of my first love was the Houston Astros in the Astrodome. And then I'd seen the Oilers, which is a tougher ticket to get in Houston, or it was, in the Astrodome several times. So yes, I'm a big fan of the Astrodome, which still stands to this day. And, the city's still
Yes.
fighting for it to stay. So
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely it's a piece of history. It's a relic now, but all other domed stadiums, the Superdome and all these others are owe their existence to, I mean they're standing on the Astrodome shoulders.
right. Well
Now,
said.
how did Amy Wieland, am I saying it right, or is it Weiland?
It's Wineland. Yeah. Wineland.
Wineland.
Yes.
So Amy Wineland becomes Amy Daughters. Was Ronaldo at a bullfight, or you attended, or was it I mean,
Right.
this is a panhandle after all. They don't have bullfights, but they've got, cattle rustling. Or what am I looking for? The cattle when they're roping cattle and all
Oh,
that.
the rodeo. Yeah, the rodeo.
Rodeo, of course,
That's what,
rodeo.
yeah, the small town rodeo. Yeah, we did not meet at the snow cones at the small town rodeo, but we did meet at the same exact summer camp where I met Dana, which is he came down to be a counselor one summer, and I was finishing up there. We both just graduated from our respective alma maters, and so that's where we met. We actually met at the front gate of the camp, and I had been there a while, so I was tasked with handing out misinformation to the new people. And so I inappropriately fingerprinted him and went through his trunk, and he drove off, bamboozled by my, shenanigans. And I told the boys, that's the kind of man for me. Next thing you know, I'm folding the guy's underwear. So,
Well, well, no, yeah, I mean, you were young then at the time.
we were 22, maybe.
Oh, he
Yeah,
was a camp counselor.
we were both counselors. That was my final summer as a
Oh,
counselor,
I see. So you're
and
both
his first
counselors.
summer, his only summer as a counselor.
So it
So,
just you two hit it off. And how long did you date before you tied the knot?
year and a half, maybe.
You
So
guys are pretty decisive.
right, right. It
He
was,
was
yeah,
not Ronaldo
Ronaldo.
Willie Daughters is not afraid of commitment.
No, and he's not afraid to get involved in a hot mess either. I think he still wonders what happened. So from
He's
El
still
Chico to
he's still on
glory,
YouTube researching what happened.
Yeah, he is. He's still trying to figure out, like, exactly what went down. So,
It's really interesting that you wrote about time travel. It's not. I guess the time travel is I would say a common sci-fi sort of thing. But what did you? I think you already revealed some of this, Amy. But what do you? What can time travel? Writing about time travel from the author's standpoint, because that's an exploration. What can it teach you?
well, I mean, it makes you, it really makes you you know, you really got to reassess everything, because when you go back in time, I guess it's just a totally different perspective on maybe on something you thought was an absolute straight line, because it completely, yeah, I think it just completely, it's a shift in perspective completely.
It's a different time. It's a different
Right.
place. In your case, you were writing about people you knew, but now it was a time shift of a significant time shift, and you did say the kind of realizations that you had. So
Right.
that's a big deal. One of the other things you've done that's really popular these days. I mean, there's a lot of books out there these days that are novels, quote unquote novels, but they're really pretty clearly memoirs that are
Right.
fictionalized and maybe partially only lightly fictionalized, maybe heavily fictionalized, but they seem to do well. I mean, memoirs are, people love to read biographies or autobiographies, memoirs, and so on, and uh, a novel written in that form, quote unquote, again, novel. Um, it's got that kind of a format. It's got that voice from beginning to end. It's easy to track. It tells a story. It tends to be chronological, which makes it really easy to track, and so on. Um, so you're kind of writing about yourself. So it's very personal to whatever degree you allow it to be. Did you make it highly personal in that way, or did you feel that there were certain areas where it's like that's I'm going to leave that one alone?
Well, and in retrospect, I think that in some ways I feel like I went too personal, and then in other ways I felt like I could have gone deeper. But I think that's the lesson in writing a book, is that, as years separate you from the process of doing it, I mean, you obviously would have changed, you would have changed things. I mean, I'm proud of the way it turned out, but I think that I didn't realize that going so personal would be so challenging. And then I didn't realize that when you feel like you left something on the table that you wish you would have done it. So I think that pendulum swings back and forth with that book for me.
How have you improved your writing over the years? Are there any techniques that you use, or is it simply an act of, look, I get up, I write every day, and I get, like anything else, it's a muscle and it develops if you keep working it? Or are there some techniques that beyond just writing daily or most days?
Well, I think being consistent is absolutely key, making yourself continue to write even when you're not feeling it, even when you know you're not going to do anything with it. But I think one thing that has really helped me is because I think one of the most painful things to do is read stuff you wrote several years ago, and I keep those in folders, and I go reread them and ask myself, how I've improved. It's almost like the whole little Amy, big Amy thing, what parts have because I feel like we all feel like we've evolved in whatever our craft is. So I can certainly see the evolution in my writing, but also what did I do good that I've stopped doing? And so I try to keep folders of stuff I wrote 5 or 6 years ago. And, maybe once a week I'll pull something out and read it and just learn something about my writing journey and make sure I haven't forgotten something. And then also make sure to say, look, in 5 years, I'm going to be even better than this, because that gives you a lot of hope as a writer. Because I think one of the things we do is we get caught in our own heads and we stop ourselves. And I think that's a very common experience.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah. And it's a great thing to look back at old writing and say, wow, I was a real ham and egger back then.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so much better now. It
Right.
definitely it's definitely inspiring and is one of those realizations that can keep a person writing, keep that forward momentum and progress. Now, do you have an agent, Amy, or have you been a solo artist your whole career?
I've been a solo artist up till this point. So,
And
mhm.
have you pursued agents?
I did at the beginning, and I got some letters back, but it's such a flooded market, and I know
It's
everyone
totally flooded. Yeah.
knows
No,
this,
I
and
mean, it's the same thing. I've had an agent at one point, but they're very hard to. It's just so hard to get their attention because there's just so many people um, sending in manuscripts. I sometimes wonder also because of the sheer number that they get. I sometimes wonder if people aren't taking their manuscript and reflagging it under a different title and going back out there with what is really the same
right.
manuscript, but they're repositioning it, thinking the person never even gave it a chance. So maybe they will with this new title and new description, and even though it's really the same book. So
That's a very interesting. I've never done, but that's a very interesting technique. But it is so flooded that and everyone says this, but we're losing a lot of good stories in this huge, cloud of all these stories. And it's really, and this, it's a hard thing to break into because really, unless you have some kind of financial, you know, where they can guarantee themselves they're going to get a certain return on their quote unquote investment, you're not going to be taken very seriously. So, but I
right.
mean, that's a very common story. So,
You know, what you do, what you have done, reminds me a little bit of there's another author out there named A.J. Jacobs. Are you familiar with him?
yes, I've heard the name.
He's the guy who he made himself for a year. He posed as Jesus Christ.
Oh, wow.
He did a whole variety of different things. He comes up with a concept for a book, and it's funny stuff that he does.
Right.
You remind me of him. You're kind of like a female version of him in that there's a concept and there's he goes pretty far out on the edge sometimes. But let me ask you this: what is the characteristic that you possess that is the most what is your writing superpower? What is your strength as a writer? Is there, I mean, you've got multiple strengths as a writer, no doubt, but I'm curious as to what you think is your primary skill within the writing realm.
Wow. That's an interesting question. I would have to say, I mean, this isn't a technique. This is more of a approach, but it's kind of my approach to a lot of things. Is that I'm not afraid of ridiculous. I'm not afraid of, you know, spinning an idea out of control to the point where I want it. And I've gained confidence in doing that. And I think that's what, especially the You Cannot Mess This Up book, the more humorous book. The other book is a story that happened, so it didn't have a lot of creative leeway. I could tell the story in a certain way, but that was it. But I think that, you know, is that the way my mind works, I can come up with some pretty, like out there, like you just said about AJ Jacobs. I can come up, but then I can put it on paper and weave it into something. I think that's probably my superpower because I've had people tell me like you have a level, you have a gear that I don't understand, and that's my gear, you know. And but I think as a writer, whatever it is your
I
power
love the way
is,
you
so
phrase that.
just what's that? The gear?
The gear, the gear that I don't understand.
Yeah. Maybe my
You're
parents
fear.
told
It
me that.
sounds like you're fearless as a writer, right?
I think there is fear, but I think I've gained confidence in doing that where I'm like, oh my gosh, that works. And that's what I can do. That's what I can bring to the table. But it's funny though, because what I want to be and what a lot of us want to be is there's a part of me wants to be this profoundly, write these profoundly moving things. But my gift is like coming up with some wild stuff. That's what I do good.
Yeah,
So
that's
I gotta
not
stick.
that's you're in a different gear, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it is you have to write what you feel, what your inner voice is telling you to write. That's the only thing that's trustworthy. Anything
Right.
else, you're really just kind of pretending or saying this is what I'm supposed to sound like because this is what I read out on the market. And this is how Richard Patterson or Danielle Steele
Right.
writes, and they sell lots of books. I want to sell a lot
Right.
of books. So I guess I have to sound like them. Well, that's not even your voice or my voice or, the fearless part is being willing to, well, I think there's two levels of that. One is just being fearless enough to say, I'm going to write what I feel, even if it doesn't sound like it's market worthy in terms of this is what you see out there these days. But the other aspect is, as you were saying, you're actually kind of threading out an idea and taking it to wherever it will lead. And you take us
Right.
in wild places. It sounds like. I mean, just from our conversation, I can tell that you're willing to take some stabs at stuff. Some of it works, I'm sure, and some of it doesn't, I'm sure.
Some of it
Um,
dives. Yeah.
yeah. Um, the what is your writing regimen? So when are you working on a book now? Are you a new one?
No, I'm working on a project. I don't know if it's a book or not. So, I mean, I
Or so
am
it could be, but it might not be.
right. I think
Okay.
it is, but I mean, I've had
So
two
are you a
primary
daily
ideas.
writer?
Oh
Oh,
yeah,
go.
I write every day. I write most mornings. I write all morning, and that's my best, like from early, like 6:30 to 11:30, and then I'll clean stuff up in the afternoon. But then I have the speaking gig, and I have other things that I'm involved in. So that's what my afternoon usually is like, doing all the maintenance, the emails and the, you know,
Do you
uh,
do anything to prep for writing? Is it just like I take a shower, grab a cup of coffee, I sit down and I write? Or is there any kind, do you light a candle? Do you meditate? Do you do anything that preps you for? You know, uh, smoke a joint or you over caffeinate or whatever?
Well, the first thing I do every single morning when I sit down is I write someone a letter or a note. And that puts me, and that, I mean, it kind of honors the Dear Dana story, but it puts me in a frame of mind where I remind myself, like, this is who I am, and that I'm going to add value to something if it all goes to the crapper today. So that's the first thing I do every morning. I usually turn some music on at the beginning and then I shut it off.
What
And
kind of
then
mu
once,
what kind of
uh,
music get you going?
like mostly stuff without any lyrics. I
Uh-huh.
like classical, I like soundtracks, whatever. And I have a little list that I update and mix up. But I leave that on for about the first 30 minutes, like circle my desk 4 times. And then once I get myself going, in the mood, I smoke a cigar when I'm done. No, I'm kidding. But I sit down and then usually
Congratulations, another day of writing. Light
that's
that
right.
cigar. You're
I
going
hope
to go
I
far.
hope it was good for you as it was for me. Yeah, no, and then once I get myself going, then I'm good, and I
What
try not to
attitude do you
stop.
bring to it? I asked this question because I remember Stephen King in his book on writing, which is part memoir, part writing guide, says when you sit down, you got to bring an attitude to it. And what's your attitude that you bring to it? Do you consciously bring an attitude to it?
Right. And I just think that energy that I just try to bring my own energy. And that's where I've been most, I'm not going to even say successful, because if you term success as I wrote a bunch of stuff that I think is good content, not that I wrote a bunch of stuff and somebody's going to buy it tomorrow. But my success is I sat down and wrote content that I'm pleased with, that I feel like is, nearing my best work. And I'm most successful when I bring my energy and it's not even a confidence. It's like I just bring it out like this is the best part of me and I'm going to put it on the paper, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I got my own interpretation of that, but you use the word energy, and what a huge, astounding difference it makes when a person, when I know when I am energetic, uh, the quality of the writing is way beyond when I'm, you know, feeling like I could take a nap right now, sort of thing. Energy is just gigantic. So, I mean, most people write in the morning probably because they've had restorative sleep and
Right.
they are energized.
Right. And clear mind. Yeah. And I think that's what it is for me. And the older I've gotten, the more the morning, like the cutoff time, and then respecting the cutoff time is a good time too. Because some people, the people who pump out a whole bunch of books, I think they can go longer than I can, but that's fine because I'm a 4 hour person, 5 hour person, and that's my sweet spot, and that's good, and you have to respect that because pushing it further than that, you're not going to have what you had in hours 1 through 3. So.
Was there a turning point in your writing life? Was there a point at which something happened that um, took you to another level or made you say, you know what, this is what I should be doing the rest of my life. I'm good at this um, and yada yada.
Yeah, and that was really important for me because since I wasn't educated as a writer, I've always had it in my head that I don't belong in the meeting. Um, because I think we live in a culture where we feel like we have to be certified in some way to do something, especially, at a bigger level. So I had written about college football for a long time. That's kind of where I got my foot in the door, where I started, having some kind of financial traction. And I was writing college football. I was a national columnist for the Bleacher Report.
Oh,
And I was
wow. Yeah.
and I was the only girl at the time doing it. And that didn't bother me because that doesn't bother me at all. But I mean, it actually gave me a name. It actually kind of helped me in a way and hurt me on the backside. But I was writing with all these guys, and there was a few of us at the time. And I was trying to work my humor in, and I like numbers and all that. And so I was kind of doing it my own way. Um, but I was having some success, but then you get frustrated because you're sitting alone in an office and you don't really even know what's going on. And I had the top editor at the Bleacher Report in college football at the time, and he called me and he said he wanted to meet with me. And I was like, oh, God, I'm gonna get
Amy, your
cut.
voice has kind of dropped out a little bit. Are you close enough to the microphone?
Yeah, let's see, is this better?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So the editor called me and wanted to meet, and I thought I was going to get cut because it's a competitive thing. And he said, I just want to tell you, I think you're one of the best three writers that we have. And he said your kind of love of football history and your numbers and your humor, the way you want to bring it. I want to make you one of the top three featured people. And it just blew me away, Mike, because I was like, wait a
Wow.
second, I don't belong here. But this guy is telling me, this guy who's been in college football forever is telling me that I'm good enough to do this. Not only am I good enough to survive, I'm good enough to be in the top echelon of this. And that really gave me the confidence to just trust myself. And that's a long process to get there. And I think I still struggle that with every day. And I know a lot of people who create do, but I was like, wait a second, I've got something here I can do.
That's a huge compliment. Yeah.
Mhm.
And you tried to bring some levity to the writing as well. So did that work well, or did you find editors striking it, like saying, well, take that's not really our tone, or did they well, if you were one of the top three, it obviously was welcome to some degree.
Right. And I had, editors are human beings with different levels of humor. And
Yeah.
and it was like finding that sweet spot. But what I went with was usually more, and then I get shut down. Like I always used to write, William and Mary as a college in Virginia. And I'd always say, well, William and Mary will be playing as a couple or something like that. And some editors would let that go, and other people would be like, no. But once I got my feet on the ground, more and more that they let it go because people were looking for it, not straight out just shenanigans, but people were looking for me to drop a couple lines in. And then I end up being the girl who wrote about like the 10 people you see at a tailgate because I'm good at that kind of thing because it's funny, girls with mascara running down their face,
I
guys who
love
used
it.
to be football players. And, so I was seen then, I was given the humorous pieces. But I was able to work it in, but I've always been someone who could go over the top and has to be shut down. So I was always getting pushed back, but that's also because I was trying to do too much.
But that's also important that you tested the boundaries of your own. You weren't doing self-editing. You allowed yourself to stretch out. That's part of being fearless with writing, knowing that, hey, if an editor doesn't like this, he or she just pares it back a little bit, and that's fine.
Right.
So,
Right.
but if you don't, well, I always remember Woody Allen saying, if you've never failed, it just means you don't even know what you're capable of. He didn't, it wasn't exactly those words, but everybody should push themselves to failure, because you could have been much, if all you did was play it safe and never failed, then you may not have even realized your potential. So the only way to really know you've realized your potential is to push yourself to failure. So in a microscopic way, in a microcosm, that's what you were doing, it sounds like. And hey, if the editor doesn't want it, then it gets struck, or it gets trimmed back a little bit.
Right. And
maybe it was just a little too wild, and they pared it back a little.
Yeah, I geared up too hard on that. But but really, if you think about it, it's back to what you said, is that, if you're not writing using your voice, if you're not tapping into what you really feel passionate about writing about, then then what are you doing? And me just in little incremental steps, pushing my humor into the sports writing is a great example of, and then I ended up achieving more by doing that than I would have by just writing about the sports like everyone else does. And I worked with many fine writers, so not everyone was, and that's not what I'm saying everyone else was doing. I'm just saying I achieved respect. I mean, I gained traction just by being myself in small degrees. So,
what obsesses you? You sound to me like a person who has an obsession or two. What obsesses you?
um, I'm obsessed. Well, I'm obsessed with numbers and spreadsheets. That really gets me going. Like if I can put anything in a spreadsheet, I would be very happy about
Oh,
it.
wow. And that
Um,
tends to be mutually exclusive with creative people. It's usually one or the other. So that's really interesting that you have both of those aptitudes.
right. I always want to wrap numbers in to everything I'm doing. And then I am obsessed with making people laugh and just being ridiculous. Like if I could be anything, I would be ridiculous all the time. And it just makes me so happy. And like I'll post something on Facebook, I'll put my head on Miss Texas's body and think it's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I thrive on that, for sure.
So that explains part of why you were a, really good sports writer. Is sports is numerical, very much
Right.
numerical. There's more to it than just the numbers, but the numbers tell stories, and that's and you're really comfortable with numbers and with the history of sports. You were saying that you'd bring some history into it some of the time.
Right. And I haven't written about sports in a couple of years because of the books and the speaking, but yeah, the history always, it was always a good thing for me because I'm very naturally interested in that. And I think as a woman writing about sports, the numbers help me too. Now, the numbers are natural for me. That's not something I went to because I'm a woman, but the numbers are great backup in sports because there's a lot of talk in sports without a lot of backup. There's a lot of opinion, and
Yeah.
that's great. But the numbers give you, but I think that says something about who I am though too. The numbers give me ground to stand on, because the numbers, which you can twist any way you want to, but they do back up what you're saying. And when you're in a male dominated arena as a woman who doesn't play the sports she's writing about, then the numbers are very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me what author inspires you most, or has been your biggest inspiration? Is there an author that you've read a lot of and just feel like, yeah, wow, that's something that gets me going, or for that matter, depresses you? Because I've had the experience, of course, I think all of us have, of reading somebody whose work is so good, it's almost depressing because it's like I'm never going to be able to write like that.
Right. I read all of David McCullough, the historian's
Hmm.
things, and what I liked about him was he took these meaty subjects that would have been dry, like just toast with no butter on it, and he turned them into social histories. And I read everything that he's written, and his gift was bringing history, real history to us, not fictional. And I like fictional history too, but and making it seem like the narrative seem like a fictional story, and just a great storyteller. I think the person that, and I love Stephen King too. I think he's probably the best writer I've ever read. And then more recently, Kristen Hanna, who most recently wrote The Women. She's the person who, if I could write like anybody, it would be her. She's unbelievable. Not only the topics she picks, but the way she writes and the way it makes you feel.
My wife has read a bunch of her stuff and got frustrated with it over time because she said these women make incredibly stupid life
Yeah, oh
decisions,
yeah,
get themselves in trouble, and then they got to get out of the trouble. And,
right.
a little bit embarrassing for women sometimes. It's like women are not that stupid, but she's obviously doing something right. She sells a lot of books,
Right.
and she had my wife uh, on the line for sure, reading a lot of her stuff. So, what's the future hold for Amy Wineland Daughters?
Well, my next hope is to write a humorous historical fiction book. And so that's like a real, knee slapper, but at the same time, looks back at a point in history. That and the talking about letter writing is what's next for me.
When you say humorous history, a take on history, do you have a particular time period or event in mind?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with the World War II era on the home front, not not battles and planes and all of those things, but the what went on here, and then the post-war period, the 50s. And the thing I'm working on right now is set in the 50s, which is very much impacted by the war. But and you don't ever read anything, especially in women's fiction, that takes that and makes it funny. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff out there, comps that I haven't delved into enough, but just a funny book that has meaning, though, that has a lot of meat on the bone, but it's a period piece that's hilarious.
Well, and when you go back in time, they wrote letters back then,
Right.
and letters were such a huge part of history because people go back and people would hold on to letters that they received, and obviously were written by somebody, so they told us so much about what people were thinking and feeling, and so it's reasonable that you might have access to letters that help you kind of nail down uh, the authentic happenings. Obviously, you're going to caricature them a little bit and making them humorous and such.
Right.
But well, we'll look forward to that. That's not a work in progress right now, or is
That's
it?
it is. That's one of the two projects I'm working on right
Oh,
now.
what's the other
So
one, if you can say?
the other is more like a small collection of short stories that are more based on hope and kind of the lessons from the letter writing. I'm very fascinated by the fact that we're so separated right now. And I'm fascinated by the power the letters had to bridge that gap between people and how we're all really the same despite what we're being told every single day. And
Mm.
so just a collection, and they're not so much humorous, there's definitely humor in there. I don't know what one does with a collection of hopeful short stories, but I'm hoping to find out. So
We'll find out. But to our listeners, the episode notes has got the URL to Amy's website where you can learn more about her and dive into her books. I'll make it simple for you. It's amydaughters.com. We'll get you there, but I've got it in the episode notes as well. And Amy, it's been a kick spending time with you. And I wish you best of luck with these new projects that you're working on. Appreciate your time.
well, Mike, I'll tell you, that's one of the most enjoyable interviews I've done. So I appreciate your questions and your levity and your engagement. So this is a great program. Thank you. It's an honor to be on here. Thank you very much.